my guest, Matt Doherty, who, Matt, for me to do your background justice, I would probably have to talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and I've got to respect the time that we have with our audience. So if you would, could you give me what you would like to be your introduction about your background, what you do now, and then the people that you serve with your business?
I'm an executive coach, keynote speaker, and author. I work with small to mid-sized business owners, founders, CEOs in the Charlotte community. And we do peer advisory through a company called Vistage, which is one of the oldest executive coaching organizations in the country. And then I go around the country, give keynote talks on leadership, team building, culture, failure, sales. And then I've written a book called Rebound from Pain to Passion, Leadership Lessons Learned. My background is basketball. I played basketball at North Carolina. I coached basketball at North Carolina, Notre Dame. And near your alma mater, I coached at FAU for a year before it was cool to coach at FAU. And then I coached at SMU in Dallas. So I've coached a lot of places. I've done various things. I worked for the NBA, the Indiana Pacers. I worked in the front office of the Atlantic 10 Conference. And I think those range of experiences has helped me.
Yeah, and so I would love to talk about, I'm sure, I know you've done tons of interviews where people have dug into your basketball background, which is a very deep wealth of experience. But I'm interested in talking about how you've applied all of that background to the business side of the house. You mentioned Vistage. I know from your website, it talks about how you use the organizational triangle framework when you work with businesses. And it talks about talent, systems, and culture. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about culture later. But could you talk a little bit about just that framework in general and why that's so important?
Sure. Well, I think that as a coach, one thing that I've always maybe been good at is when you scout opponents, you look at 3 or 4 key threads, common denominators that they do well, and how can you attack that? So whether that be one team, the teams in your league, the teams you need to compete against to win a championship. Are they strong man-to-man defensive teams? Do they run a motion offense? Are they fast break? A good offensive rebounding team, whatever that is. So when I got into the executive coaching in the leadership space, I broke down organizations, companies, teams, and said, okay, every organization has talent, has a system, and has a culture, whether that's in sports or corporate America. So what are the key factors for success? Well, you need to have a good system and you need to have good culture to support the talent, which is at the top of the triangle. So the foundation needs to be systems and culture. And the better your systems and culture, the better your talent can perform, the better the talent you'll attract, and the better talent you'll retain. And at the end of the day, I firmly believe that culture is king, that you could have great systems and great talent, but if you don't have a good culture, you will not be that successful. On the flip side, you could have average talent, average systems, and a great culture and be extremely successful. So I think the thing, as I talk to, I also do radio and TV. I interview prominent leaders on Bloomberg TV through an organization called New to the Street. And I've interviewed David Novak, who is former founder, CEO of Yum Brands. I just interviewed Tom Mendoza. Tom was president of NetApp and the Mendoza School of Business at Notre Dame is named after him. It's all culture. I played for Dean Smith, maybe the best coach in all of sports, at least one of them. You're from the Miami, Don Shula. You talk about Mike Krzyzewski, John Wooden, Dean Smith. He's in the top 5.
Yeah.
And it was all about culture, but yet he ran a good system. But you were going to pass the ball. You were going to show up on time. You were going to respect your teammates. You were going to do all the little things that it took to win. And so culture is often overlooked. People usually, a lot of times, just have a default culture. They hire somebody. You and I get to know each other. We decide to start a company. Then we hire some people that we know that kind of align with us, but then it gets watered down as you build an organization, and that's why it needs to be intentionally driven.
Yeah. When you were going through those lists of those coaches that are, great coaches and known for their culture. So you talked about FAU. I got my bachelor's. I studied there after I got my bachelor's degree, which was at Florida State back in the Bobby Bowden era. And the culture he was known for recruiting was he would convince mom and dad that he was going to take care of their son, right, and teach him how to be a man, not just an athlete. So yeah, that's a big thing that I've found in all the work that I have done. Is it's been a common thread for me that in the jobs that I loved, it wasn't even sometimes the work, it was the culture. And that feeling like I love these people that I'm working with, and we don't watch the clock. We're not thinking about, how much overtime am I working, or what, how difficult is this? It's kind of like we're part of a team, even though it's not an athletic team. There still was that sort of mindset in the companies that I loved that I worked at of that culture of like teamwork.
Well, you hit on a key word, John. You said feeling. You used the word feeling, and that is, there's companies now. Everybody wants to measure stuff, right? So how do you measure soft skills? How do you measure culture? And I was having this conversation with Tom Mendoza, and he said, "Screw that. Like, I don't care. You can't really measure it. You could use some metrics like retention rate. You could use productivity. You could use, absenteeism, but you feel it."
Yeah.
You feel it and you sense it. And I use the comparison of Starbucks versus Dunkin' Donuts. You walk into a Starbucks and it feels different than a Dunkin' Donuts. And sometimes it's hard to put your finger on it. And both places are selling coffee, but one feels better than the other.
Yeah, you're reminding me of there's a YouTube channel that I became a fan of about a year ago called The Behavior Panel. And it's these 4 guys who are experts in body language and behavior analysis. And they talk sometimes about the fact that most of the time when people are talking to them about the things they've learned about body language and behavior analysis, they already knew the concepts. They would get a feeling about somebody based on what they observed. They just didn't have the language for it to put to it, to say, I have a bad feeling about that person because the way his eyes move, the way his body, they don't have the language for it, but we all understand body language and the words that people, they resonate, you feel something. And whether you have the language or not to spell it out in certain specific verbiage, that's all kind of built into us. We have those feelings, whether we understand why we have them or not.
Well, and that's why it is a challenge. First of all, 50% of communication is body language. 35% is tone, and only 15% is content. That's why we get in trouble with texting and emails, because there is no body language and there is no tone. So then to take that another step farther is with the remote workplace, virtual workplace, you are not going to build a culture as well as you will if you're doing it in person, for the very reasons you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's I'm actually working on a course right now on exactly that. These 2 books right here, Digital Body Language and Remote Work Revolution, they're all about when we're working remotely, how do we need to do things differently? Because we can't always see people's expressions, even if everyone has their cameras on a Zoom call. When it's just you and me, that's easy, right? I can see your face really well. You can see my expressions. But if we have an all hands meeting, we've got like 50, 60 people, like I have in a training class sometimes, they're this little tiny square.
That's
so
right.
we lose a lot of that. So there's a lot of adaptation that we need to make. I know you talk about change a lot in your book. I wanted to touch on something, though, that I heard you talk about in another interview, this idea that I think you said, at least kind of tongue in cheek, about coming out with a GoPro for CEOs.
Yes.
It
Yes.
reminded me of that show Undercover Boss.
Yes.
You ever watch
No,
that?
it's exactly right. A GoPro for a CEO. So it has two cameras, one in the front, one in the back. And basically, I want to be able to study. So the thing about athletics is we study film. And I challenged some CEOs. I said, have you ever filmed yourself in a meeting? And no one has. I'm like, why not? Because 50% of communication is body language. So how do you show up in a meeting? What is your body language like? And then can you see the reaction and study the reaction of your senior staff in a boardroom, in a conference room? And then when you leave the room, you leave the second GoPro in the boardroom, in the conference room. So now I can hear them grumbling about me. I want to know the truth. I want to know what they truly about me and my ideas. And because if you're, I talk about in my book, the 6 No's of leadership, KNOWS. And I use the acronym STEVIT. STEVIT was a basketball player I recruited from Eastern Europe. STEVIT. You got to know yourself. You got to know your team. You got to know your environment, your vision. You got to know the industry, and you got to know the truth. And I think the truth is that and knowing yourself go hand in hand. But you want to know the truth. If you don't manage the truth will manage you out right out the door. So I want to know what my team is thinking. So I've got to really ideally create an environment so they'll tell me how they feel in the meeting. I don't have to leave a GoPro to find out that they're talking behind my back. And by the way, most people do talk behind the boss's back. And I think as a boss, get used to it and try to get them to talk instead of behind your back, in front of you, in conference room, by creating a safe environment for them.
Something came up to me while you were talking about imposter syndrome. So for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just because of my upbringing as a kid or my training in business, but I was very hesitant. So I've been through a coaching program, Tony Robbins coaching certification program, but I've never gone out and prospected for coaching clients because I have this imposter syndrome. These jobs that are out there, they're abject failures at almost every single job. And I think that's why when I would see stuff like that, it would almost bolster my imposter syndrome, thinking, this guy's a CEO and he can't flip a burger. That seems a little embarrassing. What would you say to someone in that type of situation that maybe just got a promotion and now they're supervising people and they have that imposter syndrome? Any advice you would have for someone like that?
Yeah, well, a couple things. I think imposter syndrome's real. I think that it is imperative that the people that promoted that person believes that they could do the job. I'm a big fan of EOS, which is the Entrepreneur's Operating System, a book called Traction. And, do they get it, want it, have the capacity to do it? So if I promote you, I should believe and have done enough homework that I understand you get it. You get the job. You get what I'm asking you to do. You want it. You really want the job, and you have the capacity to do it. Not only the mental capacity, but the time capacity that you can do it. So now, okay, Now, if you struggle with, okay, I've not done this job before. See, I believe that you don't have to know how to make a widget to sell widgets, to run a widget company. Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE, could have run any company in the world. He just happened to run GE. Dean Smith, my college coach, could have run any company in the world, in my opinion, even though he's a basketball coach, because it comes down to talent, systems, and culture. You don't have to be the expert. I mean, just think of all these CEOs who've gone from financial services to entertainment to, you look at it in sports. You have guys who are leading the Big 12 conference and a Big 10 conference whose backgrounds are in TV. What do they know about football? What do they know about universities? They know about business, and they know about systems and culture. So I think that, getting people, it goes back to another thing that I talk about in my book, and I've stolen this from Bob Bodine. Bob is an author and runs an executive search firm. Who's on your personal board of directors? So on your personal board of directors, you need to have a truth teller, but I think you also need to have an encourager saying, no, John, you can do this. And hopefully the people that hired you are coaching you, not managing you, not your bosses. They're coaching you. So now, okay, John, you've never led a group this big, but we're going to put you in some formal training through executive coaching. And we're going to also have a mentor for you that's going to meet with you once a week, once a month, that you can talk with. Maybe it's an executive coach like me. I do a lot of talk about imposter syndrome and isolation relief because it's lonely at the top. And the imposter syndrome, I'm not good enough. I say this, John, you don't think you're good enough? Sit across from yourself and have a conversation with yourself and tell yourself why you're good enough. Because our self-talk sucks, right? Most people's self-talk sucks. So, and the person we spend the most time with is ourselves. Yeah. So we've got to start feeding ourselves positive information. I started journaling July 31st. I thought journaling was soft. It was weak. It was snowflake. This year.
Okay.
And so I read this book called Soundtracks. By the way, I've mentioned a couple of books already. Your life's impacted by three things: the people you meet, the books you read, and the trauma in your life. The first two you can control. So I suggest that you intentionally meet people that can help you with your trajectory of your career. Two, reading books, listening to podcasts can impact your career. And then the trauma in your life, that's coming whether you like it or not. And instead of looking at it as a negative, look at it as a positive. What did I learn from that experience? So, having encouragers in your life, having people, and sometimes we have to have daily affirmations that say, I am good enough. I have a gift worth giving. I am a good speaker. I am a good executive coach. I do impart wisdom on my clients, and because we are with ourselves more than anybody else, and we need to give ourselves positive self-talk.
I couldn't help it when you're talking about affirmations. Were you ever a Saturday Night Live fan?
Oh, yeah. I remember the one with Michael Jordan. That's the one you're probably going to talk about, right?
Affirmations, right?
Yeah. No, that's classic.
It's
classic. I think as great as Michael Jordan, I played with Michael for 3 years in college. There was a time where he lost confidence. He needed encouragement from his teammates and his coach. Preseason, his junior years, preseason player of the year. Expectations were unrealistic. Fortunately, we had a good team. but he struggled the first two tournaments we were in that year. I made first team all tournament and he didn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, then obviously, he got his mind right, and the rest is history. But even the best have negative self-talk at times.
So in chapter 8 of your book, you talk about the importance, you talk in your book specifically about the first 90 days. But I wanted to ask you about, when I was a financial advisor, they were always doing things to kind of build and try to keep momentum. And they talked a lot about the importance of getting and maintaining momentum, and the fact that most people can do almost anything for 90 days.
Yeah.
Is that something, when you worked at Kidder Peabody, for example, when you did essentially like a sales type role or whatever sales roles you might have had, did you use that type of thing?
We didn't use 90 days per se, but it's funny you bring that up because when the book Traction, EOS, it talks about breaking things down to 90 days. They call them rocks, so that you have a 90-day review, a 90-day period, and you have rocks to accomplish. Those are your goals. And they feel that they need to be 90 days because if they're longer than that, you'll procrastinate, put it off. But 90 days is kind of the sweet spot. And people, that was the sweet spot. And then you break them down to, monthly, weekly, daily goals, but having 90 days. And then it was funny because I'm referring back to Tom Mendoza. He used a 90-day system when he was starting out, when he was at NetApp. He talked about a 90-day system. He would have 3 goals, personal goals, 3 goals for work. And 90 days was the key because he felt if it was any longer than that, you'd procrastinate and put it off. And any less than that, it was really kind of hard to have any meaningful change. But he'd take those 90-day goals and break them down into weekly, daily goals and say, okay, I want to lose weight. So to lose weight, I'm going to work out 3 times a week for 30 minutes a day. And then he'd continue to try to stretch that.
So in your coaching, you deal mostly with executives, right? Like C-suite level executives.
Yes.
So a guy who did a lot of training years ago when I was a financial advisor used to talk about the idea of the value gap, not the value gap though with a product or a service, but in leadership. And what he was talking about, the way he explained it, was when you're a leader, there you always have to have a gap between you and the people that are following you that gives them a reason to follow you. That gap might be your knowledge, it might be your skills, it might be your leadership ability, whatever that thing is. But he felt like you always had to be doing personal development to kind of stay ahead of those people that you were leading, right? To have something that's valuable to them. So I'm curious, what do you perceive as sort of a value gap when you're talking to C-suite executives that you come in with, that to them from day one, you don't have to sell really hard. It's pretty obvious. Is there anything that jumps out?
Well, a couple of things jump out. I think that, I've never heard it put that way in terms of a value gap, but I think what that comes to mind is the motto of my company is learn and grow. So you need, as a leader, to model the behavior that you want in your employees, that you want in your team. So, Roy Williams, my guy worked for Kansas, and legendary college basketball coach, would say, if you might be on the right track, but if you're standing still, you're going to get run over. So if I'm asking you as a player or employee to get better, but I'm not getting better, I'm just going to the country club, playing golf and eating a big steak at night, what example am I setting? But if I'm continuing to read, I'm continually to go to conferences, to listening to podcasts, to getting better myself, then I am hopefully setting the example for you. What I try to do when I took over as an executive coach, a thing I had to overcome for people was, oh, you're a basketball coach, you've never run a business. And then I had to say, well, let me ask you a question. As the head coach at Notre Dame, the head coach at North Carolina, those were worldwide brands, multi-million-dollar budgets. I had a P&L, which was basically my win-loss record. I had a recruit talent. I had a train talent. I had a retain talent. I had a fire talent. I had a board I had to answer to, and I had to talk with the media.
And you had to do all of that with almost like a microscope on you the whole time.
Yes. So when I say that, then people like start nodding like, oh, okay, yeah, you get it. And then I go to the organizational triangle where it's all about talent, systems, and culture. And so I've been a part of great cultures. I know what it's like to drive championship cultures, and I've been a part of good systems. And then I studied business systems. I studied EOS. I studied the book Traction. I'm a proponent of that. So there are things, and I'm a coach. I'm an executive coach. I'm not a consultant. So I don't come in and fix things. I try to introduce solutions and bring people together, whether it be our speakers or other members, and introduce things and kind of ask questions. And I can especially help by with the systems and the culture piece, but there are parts I don't know. So it's my job to study, and I'm passionate about studying. So going back to the value gap, like I'm always reading ahead and trying to introduce books. I try to read 3 books a month. So when there's a topic that comes up in one of my one-to-one sessions, I'll be like, well, I just, like we were talking about positive self-talk. There's a great book I mentioned earlier, Soundtracks. What is the soundtrack we're playing in our head? So I can help a CEO deal with imposter syndrome. And so, just constantly learning. When I first started working with an executive coach after I lost my job in 2003 at North Carolina, she said to me, you're a lifelong learner. And I never heard that term before. So I just try to continue to learn. So maybe that's the value gap that I can offer some of my clients.
Yeah, always getting new ideas, that's one of the things that I try to do with my training is try to, like, I'm sure I've heard you talk about DISC assessments, and I've heard you talk about 360. So I know you've gone headfirst into assessments and the value that they bring. One of the ones that I did was the Big Five, and the person that did that assessment for me, that was giving me feedback, pointed out that one of the things this thing identifies is that you tend to connect dots that some other people don't. And I thought, okay, that could be problematic. Everything kind of comes with pros and cons, right?
Right.
That can be problematic. And then if I'm talking about something that for me connects quite logically in my brain, but if I don't provide the right context, it could be confusing to people.
That's right.
Where I found it helpful, though, is I can read a book written by a military interrogator and go and look at that and connect the dots to these are great lessons in how to ask good questions and how to listen effectively, right? Where somebody else might say, why would I as a business person want to read a book written by a military interrogator? Well, let me help you connect the dots, right?
Right. Yeah.
So on the culture thing, I'm curious. So I've looked at culture from a lot of different perspectives, and I've heard you talk about culture in terms of like your values and like team values. I wonder what your thoughts are, and I'm sure this has happened to you before, where you're working in a team and you've got people that come from a different culture. And let's just take one value, just for conversation's sake, to make it simple: respect. Where someone in the United States might feel like, for me to feel respected, I expect you to give me good eye contact.
Right.
But I might have someone on my team who's from a different part of the world, like some of the Asian countries, where they don't make a lot of eye contact. and that could be misperceived
Right.
as disrespectful.
Right.
What is your advice for people who work in some of these? Because I've worked with some of these big companies that we might have a training with 100 people in 5 different countries. And this comes up all the time where there are these culture clashes.
Yeah. Well, that's where it's not one size fits all. I had that very experience as a head coach. I had 3 players from Senegal, all right, Africa. And I'm a big eye contact guy. And they were not giving me eye contact, and I got upset at them in a meeting. And after the meeting, one of them came up to me and said, you know, coach, in our country, it's a sign of disrespect if we give eye contact to, you know, an elder. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, how off was I? So what's the key to that? It's getting to know your people. I go back to my Stevitt example, the 6 no's of leadership. The second one is know your team. So you've got to get to know your team. Okay, John, where are you from? What was it like growing up? What was important to your parents? As a recruit, if I had to coach again, when I would recruit and a player would sign with me, I'd ask, okay, how do they respond to criticism? What is the best way for me to connect with them? The thing that I really was poor at when I first started coaching as a head coach was emotional intelligence. So I sat in a class at Wharton and studied out of a book called Primal Leadership, realizing the art of emotional intelligence by Dan Goleman.
Goleman, yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I didn't get that piece because I thought people should all think and like me and look at things like me, but no, and thank God they don't. So you can't have a one size fits all training program when you're talking about multicultural. So I would break it down, or I would ask for feedback, or I would say, all right, you know, I need, you know, if it's international, I want somebody representing this country, somebody represent that country. I want their input on how we should design this. What is the mission of this? Goes back to your military training, military discussion. What's the mission? We want them to be better financial advisors. We want them to sell more product. Okay. So who are they calling on? Well, they're probably calling on people of, you know, if I'm Asian, I might be calling on more Asians, right? Because those are the people I know. That's you know, but I need to study their traits, their likes, their dislikes. How do I emotionally connect? Because in sales, it's know, like, and trust. So, all right, John, you're from South Florida. Sanchez, I'm assuming, is that, you know, Hispanic? Is it, you know, okay. You know, so now I better, you know, get to know how you were born and raised, what's important to you, values, is God, church, what was important growing up, what kind of manners, you know, what as a recruiter, you know, I had to go into a lot of homes. I'd go into Compton, LA, to Beverly Hills, LA. You know, I didn't wear the same stuff. I didn't drive the same car. I didn't, but I talk about in terms of a bowling alley. You know, you go to a bowling alley, you put up the guardrails. As a little kid, stay within your guardrails, be authentic, but you can adapt to your clientele. So if I'm going into recruited a kid, Ray LaFrance from Monona, Iowa, town of 1,700 kids, I wasn't going to roll in there in a Cadillac and a 3-piece suit. I was going to roll in a golf shirt, khakis, and just a nice sedan. But in another neighborhood, maybe I go into Beverly Hills, I might wear a suit and drive a Cadillac, you know? So you got to know your audience, stay true to yourself, stay within those parameters, so you're not being a phony.
Yeah.
So I think the key is knowing your audience. So if you're having 100 people in a training program, you can't teach everybody the same thing. You don't want them doing the same things, but you want them to be successful. And the mission is to sell more product, make them better salespeople. So maybe you customize, have 5 different training programs for, 5 different subsets of that group.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest pushbacks I've gotten when I'm talking about communication skills in a training, and I talk about the platinum rule, right? So everybody's heard the golden rule, do
Yep.
unto others as you would like done unto yourself, but everyone doesn't like done unto them the same way, right?
That's right.
So that platinum rule, give them what they want the way they want it. Well, when you become a leader and now you're managing or supervising or leading teams, now you have all these different people and they're all unique. And so you're trying to give them things that the way they want them, so you're more effective. And I think I get this pushback from leaders all the time, like, this is hard, man. Like, I got
It is
12
hard.
people that report to me. Yeah,
It,
that's
it is
getting at.
hard. It is hard. Like it's work. Not everybody. This goes back to one of the capacity to do it. Do you have the capacity to lead? Well, the capacity to lead means you have to take the time and have the mental energy to figure out, okay, I have to be a little pliable as a leader to emotionally connect with everybody in my organization. But there's going to be certain things I don't bend on. Okay.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
My core values are respect, trust, commitment, positivity. You're not going to be late for a meeting. Okay. You're not going to cheat on your expenses. You're not going to take credit for victory. And you will not show up in a negative state of mind. And so those things are non-negotiable. But there are other things that I've had to learn to ignore. I had to learn to accept. Somebody's late for a meeting, I'm not going to blow them out of the water at first. Now, when I was young head coach, I did. But maybe, why were you late? And if my partner had a heart attack. Okay. Or my mother just had to take her to the hospital. Okay. I'll trust and verify that. Right. But if it was his third mother that died, and then you're like, but so you learn to accept certain things, and certain things are unacceptable. And I think the big thing as a leader is it does take work. You got to know your people. You got to be able to emotionally connect with your people. And that's why I believe that a leader is in charge of 3 things. CEO. You cast the vision, you drive the culture, and you engage in large business development. All right. So cast that vision, drive the culture. So you have to free up your schedule and delegate so that you can walk the floor and spend time with your people, because that's the best way to drive a culture. Does that mean, phone calls, travel? Yes, all of it. The best leaders travel and want to show up and spend time with their people. That's how you drive a good culture.
Yeah, you just reminded me of a term that I coined years ago, SWOT on the fly. So you think of the classic SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The idea being, do a SWOT analysis on the fly, like all the time, that like kind of management by walking around.
Right.
Get out of your spreadsheets, get out of your office, go see the people, watch what they're doing, and see how your business is being run by the boots on the ground. So that when people raise their hand and say, hey, we got an issue, we got a problem over here that we need some help with, and it's going to take some money to do it, and they, request some money to solve a problem, you've been out there and you kind of see what that problem is out in the real world versus just on a piece of paper on some form. And it's a huge difference.
No, it's and also I was talking about radical recognition. To drive a culture, my college coach, Dean Smith, would say, praise the actions you want repeated. So catch people doing something right. Now that's David Novak talked about that of Yum Brands, and so did Tom Mendoza of NetApp. Catch people doing something right. So what is that going to do, right? So I was initially a find the flaw kind of coach. So I would pick on things that they weren't doing right. So I was
That's a
figuring it was a waste
culture
of
I
time. It was a
grew
waste
up
of
in
time to tell
business.
people what they were doing right. They're already doing it right. They don't need to improve that.
Yeah.
That was short-sighted on my part. That goes back to the emotional intelligence. So Coach Smith would do it all the time. I do it now. My mother did it. Praise the actions you want repeated. So if I say, John, hey, in front of the team, thank you very much for showing up 5 minutes early and getting all the papers organized for the presentation. What do you think the person sitting next to you's, should want to do the next time?
That's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right. That's the
right
behavior.
stuff. Yeah.
Right. John, good job. John, good job. John, good job. John, good job. John, well, we're all little kids wrapped up in adult clothing. We're all little kids in that sandbox that it's my toy. Mommy, look at me. We all want that recognition. So now you have to play to that as a leader and say, John, good job. John, hey, really good job. What a great presentation. I love, John, how you had the big fonts and you didn't have too much on the page like we discussed. So it was readable. We can get through it. People didn't get lost in the content. You did high level stuff. That's exactly how I want a presentation to be done. Excellent work, John. Now, David Novak talked about this, the Gallup polls, like 70% of the people leave jobs because they don't feel appreciated by their superiors. Not because of money, it's because they don't feel appreciated.
Yeah, people don't leave for money. They leave because of the people. I wish, man, if people say sometimes, what advice would you give your like 17-year-old, 20-year-old self?
Yeah.
Pick a number. I wish I would have known so many of these things that were more about what's between our ears and about culture like you're talking about. Because I can remember it was a big red flag, but I didn't realize it was when I was working at this one job. And I asked one of the guys in another department, said, hey, my boss told me if I take this class, as long as it's related to my job, the company will pay for it. I was like, that sounds cool. I'm going to talk to my boss. I had this American Management Association, this catalog of all these classes. And I found one that sounded exactly like for me, right? For my job. I show it to my boss and I asked him the question. He says, hey, Sanchez, if I got to train you, I got the wrong guy. You're supposed to already know how to do your job. Now, back then, I just thought, oh, okay. And let me just be quiet, not ask again. What I should have thought was, I'm in the wrong place. This is not the right culture for me because I want to always be getting better. And this culture, it doesn't fit.
Right. No, but when you're younger, you don't know. And it goes back to maybe a little bit of the imposter syndrome, but fear, the one thing I love about being a Vistage chair, I get to learn a lot and we have great speakers. And this one speaker talked about don't operate out of fog, fear, obligation, guilt. So what you did there sounds like you operate out of fear. Like, I'm not going to push back on this. I should be lucky 100%. Lucky to have a job, and you thinking, well, why should I be afraid to ask that question? And am I just obligated to this person, to this job, to this department? Do I feel guilty about thinking about moving to a different company or a different division? And then going back to the board of directors. So now you go to somebody that you respect, that maybe is a mentor, and say, hey, I went to my boss with this. What's your take on that? And I would right.
my mentality was just be quiet, do what you're told,
Right.
be a good soldier,
Well,
don't
you're
make
probably
noise, don't
younger
make
than me, but
waves.
you respect your elders, you work 30, 40 years, get your gold watch and retire.
That was kind of what my parents kind of brainwashed
Sure,
me with.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Which worked for them.
Work for them.
It worked great for them, and the world they grew up in and they worked in, that worked for them.
Yeah.
And I think when I got out of college, that was still working for people.
Mhm.
But I was definitely more in a mindset of just being kind of a soldier, just kind of, mine is not to question why, mine is to do or die. Just do what you're
Right.
told.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize that the people that get the cool projects, the promotions, the raises, and the cool other job offers are the people with the new ideas, how to do things better. But it's all in how you communicate that, right? You can't go to your boss and go, hey, the way we're doing this is terrible. This is how we should. It's not going to go over too well.
That's right.
But there's a way you can present ideas if you know how to do it, where you can look a little bit more like a star, but you kind of have to put your ego on the shelf, which for me, when I was in my 20s, I was all ego.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
the other thing is the boss needs to coach you and give you the opportunity to say, like at Apple, I mean, Steve Jobs, I enjoyed reading about Steve Jobs. And, there were, I don't know how it was broken down, but they would designate time for creative play. Like during the workday, I want you have an hour a day or hour a week or half a day, whatever it is, to work on anything you want to work on. I want you to come up with innovative
yeah,
ideas, and
yeah.
so,
Google
I
had,
want you to bring me ideas. That's stimulating to me. And as a leader, that person's secure. There are so many insecurity is so common. And so leaders that are insecure overcome that with a bigger sense of ego, and they're going to block new ideas because they're insecure. So as a as a younger person, you want to work for somebody that's very secure, that will encourage you to come up with new ideas and take some reasonable risks.
that kind of leads me into something I heard you talk about before, this idea of masks. What
Yes.
made me think about that is the guys that I worked for that I thought were very secure and very confident, that was just their mask.
Yeah.
They were probably as insecure as I was. And they were kind of just continuing the culture that they were taught, right? And we look back now, I'll say myself, let me not put words in other people's mouths. I look back now sometimes and I'll see things in corporate culture now that my 20-year-old self would look at and go, this is soft.
Yep.
This is all this touchy-feely, giving everybody everything they want, the way they want it. It's my 20-year-old brain talking, right?
Right.
Pointing at that, going, what a bunch of weak people.
Yep.
And then I have to step back and go, well, wait a second, John. Don't most parents want their kids to have better than what they had? Aren't we, now that we're older, shouldn't we be looking at corporate culture and saying, like, we should make this better? Why do I want this to be more difficult than it should be? Because that's what I experience. It's kind of like hazing somebody in a fraternity, right? But
Right.
this is real life, not a
Right.
fraternity,
That's right.
right?
No, you're right. I think that's the open-mindedness, curiosity. Curiosity is a real gift. I think it can be trained, but always like, how can we make this better?
Yeah.
Is this the best we can do? Um, going against the grain. Just because it's been done this way doesn't mean it's the way we should be doing it. And I think the people that are secure as leaders and in themselves foster that. They challenge the status quo, and they invite their team to challenge the status quo. And those are the people, like at Apple, that get the best and the brightest minds.
Yeah, one of the guys I had on the podcast, guy Jim Pyle, he was a military interrogator for 20 years. And he said, if people were naturally curious, I wouldn't have to teach them anything about interrogating, because it's just all about asking questions.
Yes.
Right. And if you're natural, I just happen to be naturally curious. Is why it came up in our conversation. But a lot of people are not naturally curious. And some of it, I think, unfortunately, is because they've had it kind of beaten out of them through the cultures that they've worked in, that don't ask questions, just do like you're told. Don't question, ask questions like I used to ask all the time. Why do we do it this way? Couldn't we do it that? That's the way we've always done it, which I think is
it sounds like you went to. It sounds like you went to Catholic school too.
I didn't, but most of my jobs felt like that.
Yeah. No, I grew up.
My dad,
I grew up going to Catholic school, and you did as you were told.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a real good topic, and I think that kids need to feel confident and encouraged to ask why. We as teachers and coaches should explain why. And that's something that I try to do as a coach, because when I was a player, as we just touched on, you did what you were told. So as I got older, as I became a coach, I always tried to explain the why and what we were doing, because then you would get more conviction in the execution of the offense or defense when they would understand why we were doing a certain drill in practice, or why we were attacking a certain, zone defense the way we were. Now they understood not only the mission, but the strategy and the tactics. And I think that's coaching. I think that's teaching.
Yeah. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour, and there's a ton of questions I'd love to ask you, but I want to make sure I respect your time. But I do want to ask you one last question. We'll wrap up here. I know you've been interviewed like a zillion times, and I'm curious, is there a question that no one has ever asked you that you wish they would have asked you?
Oh, gosh. I don't think so. I've been asked a lot of questions, and I've been very open. I've had some great experiences. I've had some rough experiences. So there's not anything that I recall that people should have asked me that they didn't, or I wish they did.
Right.
But feel free, take a shot at it.
I'll throw one last one at you then. What is something that you're most excited about right now, whether it's business, personal, whatever?
Yeah. What's the thing I'm most excited about? My wife and I are going to Jerusalem in October. We're Christians, and I'm going to get to walk the actual ground where Jesus walked. That's pretty exciting.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. That's a great way for us to wrap up on a positive note like that, on something very, very cool. And I want to thank you very much for your time. I know there's a lot of lessons in here. I really enjoyed our time. I would love to have you back sometime down the road, because I had a bunch of questions to ask you. We didn't get to them all, but want to respect your time and go ahead and wrap up here.
Well,
So
thank you.
and
that you're a good podcast host. You in my mind, you over prepare, and you probably end up using 10 to 25% of the material. But you take you take the you go with the flow. And I think I've enjoyed this conversation, and I appreciate the research you did in preparing for it, John.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. Where can people find you?
Yeah, Doherty. My website is dohertycoaching.com. DOHERTY coaching.com.
All right. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up, and we will see you guys next time.